in this country, we teach math, English, science, the arts, physical education, sometimes language, sometimes some of these programs are not apparent in every school. And I would be remiss not to acknowledge that. But one area we don't really teach about, where it's standard in the curriculum, we don't teach really about economics, finance, and personal wealth. We don't do that in our schools.
We don't do our young black people any service by not talking to them about the realities of what it takes to get an education.
Hello and welcome back to Black Vision Network. So I'm Theo. So today I'm flying solo. As you know, if you haven't checked into our channel before, the four pillars of our channel are education, counseling, business, and healthcare. And today we're tapping into the education side of things. We have a special guest with us today. So we wanted to bring in some experts in their field to kind of get their perspective on the world that they own. And so today I have one of my former teachers, Monica Pickett. She is the head of school at the Montessori School of Raleigh. And so, Ms. Pickett, did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, Theo. It is great to be able to reconnect with you again today. It's such a pleasure. I'm so proud of you and to see all that you've accomplished since Morgan Park Academy. And probably the most exciting, hearing that you're starting your own venture to really delve deep into the Black community, and also that you were engaged. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So trying to dive right into it, the purpose of what we are trying to do is expose kind of any problems in the education sphere as it pertains to the Black community. We want to empower the Black community to get the best education possible. And so you, as an education professional, can you talk about perhaps any life-changing well, before we even get into that, why did you want to get in the education field in that background?
Sure, that's a great question. I would say that in school, in my undergraduate degree, I studied Spanish, and in my master's degree for grad school, I studied Spanish. And I really wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do when I finished my master's degree. I was really considering becoming an attorney. So I started to study for the LSAT, and I was living with my parents at the time after I returned from living overseas in Madrid upon finishing my graduate degree. And, my mother had made it very clear to me when she started to kind of push a little bit and ask, what are your plans now that you have your master's degree? What are you going to do? And I'm like, I was living at home with them. I think I'm just going to take some time, study for the LSAT, and, it might take a year and a half, and then get a job. And having as you have a Black mother, as I have a Black mother, my mother was not feeling that and was like, I don't think so. You have to get a job. So begrudgingly, at the time, I got a job at a small or mid-size, I'd say, private school in Chicago, at a Montessori school there, teaching Spanish, and that kind of jump started my career in education, and I fell in love with the field. But that was not my initial thoughts. But after being in it for about a year or two, I thought, this is really for me, and I want to delve deeper into it. So there was that. But the other part of it too was that, my grandparents they were all born and raised in the Deep South, and not one of them have a high school education or had a high school education. And it was really important. They were the granddaughters and grandsons of former slaves, and they themselves and their parents were sharecroppers. And the one thing that my family on both sides, I would say, really emphasized was the importance of education, and that, people can attempt to take your dignity, they can attempt to take your resources, but they can't take your knowledge and what you know. So I would say each generation in my family starting from 1865 at the end of the Civil War. Each generation really made a commitment to do better than the generation that came before them. So I think if there's something that impacted me to stay in this field and to really try to do good work, it was that of just my family history and knowing where I come from, which I think provides a lot of strength for Black people.
Absolutely. So talk a little bit more. You talked on a numerous good points. You obviously have attained a lot of higher education, higher degrees, and you talked about your travel and living in other countries, and obviously your background, your family being from the deep South and spending time in Chicago. Talk about your little bit more about the connection of being Black in America and the connection between that and the education system in your experiences.
Sure. I think it's important, to reflect that when you think about the education system in the United States, be it public or private, and specifically as it relates to Black people, that it was illegal during the times of slavery for Black people to know how to read, how to write, how to count, all of these things. Were there exceptions in history where some enslaved people were taught those things? Yes. And I'm not talking about free Blacks, but specifically enslaved people. So I think that when you start talking about education in America, it's important to recognize that in its beginnings, unless you happen to be in a class of free Black people, that education was not expected or meant for you. And so I think that when you realize that and you look at how far today Black folks have come and what we've been able to accomplish and continue to accomplish, it's been at the face of adversity, but still there was a little bit of an unfair, not a little bit, quite the unfair start. So, and that's just reality. That's facts. That's history. And I think it's important, though, for Black folks to recognize and accept that reality, that this is what happened, and it wasn't fair, but it's what happened. But what can I do today by still understanding what happened in history, but what can I do today to move forward? And so although I think our schools, be them public schools, private schools, or charter schools, are owed to every child in this country, really I think a child's first teacher is their parents. So I think it's when you start talking about gaining an excellent education, that starts at home. That starts with the parents realizing they have a better vision for their child and for their children, similar to what many, I'd say the majority of Black folks whose ancestors were enslaved in this country, those people who were enslaved survived and they went through it and they wanted their generations to do better. So what I shared about my family early on in this interview, that's not unique to me. I would say that happened for most Black folks who are able to trace their roots, to the time of slavery. But I say that to say that education is really a family decision. A mother, the parents have to make the decision that and they have to own that they are their child's first teachers, period. It's not up to the school. It's up to the school to provide the specifics. I can't teach physics. I can't teach chemistry. I can't teach economics. But what I can teach is give my child the skills and the confidence to be able to excel in those areas and choose the right schools by educating myself to set my child up for success in that way. And so I'll still go back to, and I always say, parents are their child's first teachers, period. And once you're able to work from that point of view, I think it makes parents the ability to choose the right schools. And even if it's homeschooling for some families is the best way to go. And I think that's okay. And I think that's a positive about our country is that we have choice and Black people have choice as to how they want to educate their children, just like anyone else.
Absolutely. So kind of like you said, transitioning to
now in the education system as it stands now.
Mm-hmm.
You've been an educator and now you sit as a head of school. Do you feel that the current education system, whether it be public, charter, or private, prepares Black students for a sustainable life?
That's an excellent question, Theo. I think that if you look at the system as a whole, public, private, charter, I'll keep homeschooling out of this equation because I think it's a little different. You look at the statistics of how American students perform in comparison to other countries, and we lag behind as a whole in certain areas. So that's number one. And then you take a look specifically at Black students, whether, and you look at the different socioeconomic backgrounds, and you see a deeper lag. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rule, but when you start looking at this data and you start asking yourself questions, I think the question you ask is kind of, I would say it's apparent that we're not meeting the needs of all American students and specifically with Black students. And I think when you go back to the history of our country where education was not designed or meant for for Black children specifically, when you think about education starting off at a young age, well, no wonder there's a lag behind. But having state, and that's again, sometimes it's hard to have these discussions and speak truthfully about them. But, and of course, every family, there's nuances to each family that could explain a lag. But you have to wonder if there's a general problem. Okay, there's a general problem in the country. But when you start looking at groups that have been systematically discriminated against, well, it makes sense. And I think it's up to Black educators like myself and non-Black educators to be a part of the solution to fixing this, because of course we want to not want our Black students to succeed in this country is to not want our country to succeed. So we have to have our Black students succeeding just as any group of students. But to ignore that is to ignore the history and the current realities of the country. And we could talk about a lot of different issues that have to do with this. And I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. It starts with the family. But if you have a breakdown of the family, when we think about our prison system and the high numbers of Black males who have been in prison, which has been in my own family with extended relatives, well, that's going to affect the family. And that's going to affect education. So it's all cyclical. It's all a cycle. And I think it's the fact that you're bringing this up, Theo, I think is really important. We just have to stick to the facts. And again, I'm going to go back to if Black students don't succeed in this country, the country doesn't succeed. All students have to succeed here. And so it's up to educators and non-educators to make that happen and to look at the different things that are occurring in society that would explain some of the what's the word I'm looking for? The discrepancies, if you will, that we see. And that's just facts.
Sorry about that in the background. That was my dog.
No, it's okay. It's all good.
But yes, so can you identifying those problems? So I kind of want to get into your personal experiences. You touched on how when you moved back home and you were trying to figure out, which direction you wanted to go. And your mom kind of was like, well, you got to get a job. Can you touch on if there were any other experiences in your lifetime that kind of shaped, or any obstacles that you had to overcome that kind of shaped and allowed you to be where you are today? Like you said, it starts with the family. And we all have to go through obstacles to achieve higher education, achieve higher status. But can you touch on some of the personal experiences or obstacles that you had to overcome that have influenced your thoughts that you've shared today and where you are in life currently?
Sure, yeah, and absolutely, and feel free to stop me, Theo, if you want me to go deeper on something or if I miss something. So when I think about influences or obstacles, a criticism that I have of most of the American education system, whether it is public school, private school, charter school. Again, I think homeschooling is a little different because there's more freedom for creativity and creating a curriculum. In this country, we teach math, English, science, the arts, physical education, sometimes language, sometimes some of these programs are not apparent in every school. And I would be remiss not to acknowledge that. But one area we don't really teach about, where it's standard in the curriculum, we don't teach really about economics, finance, and personal wealth. We don't do that in our schools. You will find schools here and there that do it, but it's not what I would call standard. And so I think what winds up happening is you get a bunch of really excited kids, it's probably starting around middle school, high school. They start to think about what they want to be, what they want to do. College, gotta go to college, want to go to college. And a lot of these kids are coming from middle class backgrounds, whether they're lower middle class, you're kind of conventional middle class, or upper middle class. And in high school, they set their sights high. And you remember this, Theo, from MPA. You set your heights high on college, but no one really, really educates you about the cost to get there. If you're it, Not at all. I mean, sometimes parents who are well-meaning, like my own parents, for example, attended college. That's where they actually met. But they had student loans. They never really talked to my sister and I about that, except you got to go to college, which I'm glad they said that and they had great careers in different industries. But we don't really talk to people, young Americans, about the cost to do it. And until something changes in this country, you'll have to excuse me, Theo, I'm getting over a cold. But until something changes in this country, I think we're doing our young people a true disservice because these kids are graduating from college. They're excited about their careers. They think they're going to get a job making $90,000 a year. And if they do happen to get a job making $50,000 a year, they've got all this debt. And no one really truly breaks it down. So when you talk about influences, my uncle Delso, my mother's older brother, may he rest in peace, he passed away. He was one of the he was like, how would I describe my uncle? A cool cat, a smart guy who was in the military and went to night school, worked his butt off to get his bachelor's degree, and went back to school to get his MBA, and became this just really highly successful person. But he talked to me about money. And he was one of the first people to just pull me aside and say, let's have a conversation. What are your plans? What are you doing? How do you think you're going to pay for it? And I would say him and my Aunt Linda, their siblings, my mother's,
had the same conversation. She had the same conversation with me. And I think that that is something that influenced me to, when I was thinking about college, how was I going to pay for it? Because my parents, as lovely as they are, that really wasn't the conversation my sister and I had with them. It was like, just take out debt. And so when my uncle and aunt spoke to me, I made some decisions. I decided I would go to a community college for the first few years. And that meant I was at a community college for 3 years working part-time. Working 2 or 3 jobs and going to school part-time because I didn't want to have debt.
Right.
And then I transferred to a public university. Probably could have gotten into a much more competitive and a much more fancy university, but I didn't want the debt to go for it. And I didn't have some special talent. I wasn't an athlete. I wasn't an artist or a theater person where I was going to get some type of great scholarship. That just wasn't it. That wasn't my strength. So I chose to go to a public university, University of Illinois, Chicago. Had a great education experience. and graduated from there with very little debt. But then I decided to go to grad school because I knew that a bachelor's degree probably wasn't going to make me competitive enough. I needed to have a little bit more of an edge and for what I wanted to do. And I acquired more debt, but I acquired way less debt than what I see kids acquiring now, and have been able to pay off all of my student loans except one, which is a whole nother discussion. Like, why are we even paying all of this money for undergraduate education? But that's for another day. But I think they influenced me in a way. It was the first time somebody who looked like me, who came from my family, talked to me about the realities. If you want to do this is how much it's going to cost. If you want a car, how are you going to get a car? Oh, I'm going to take out a loan. They were like, well, how about you work another job and save some money to get it? Right. And it was like, ding, 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 ding. It was like, whoa. And I saw my uncle with several investment properties. I knew my Aunt Linda had paid off her home early. You start to see these examples, and they impact you about there is another way to go. I don't have to have all this debt. I can have money saved in the bank for an emergency and a rainy day. And it's about just thinking differently. But we're sold this lie, like go to college, take out graduate when you're 21 or 22 with $80,000 in debt, and then get a job where you're making less than that, and you have interest rates that are killing you.
Yep.
We don't do our young black people any service by not talking to them about the realities of what it takes to get an education. And one thing, I know it's controversial, but it's coming back. What's wrong with getting a trade? What's wrong with becoming an electrician or a carpenter? And having a great, making lots of money and be able to provide for your family. What's wrong with that? We need to build things in this country. And so I think we have to do a better job when children are young in helping them to discover what their passions are. And I don't think college is for everyone. And you know what? That's okay. College doesn't have to be for everyone. College needs to be for those who want to go. Right. And if someone wants to become an electrician, one of my uncles my Uncle Andre is totally successful, just retired electrician, and his wife is an RN. She retired too.
Nice.
They have a great life. He didn't go to college, at least. I mean, other than community college. But what's wrong with that? So I think these are, when you start talking about education and those influences, I think the people who influenced me most were family members. Because I saw it. It wasn't a person on TV. It was that person who pulled me aside and said, hey, what are you doing? What's your plans? And I think of my grandmother, she just wanted her kids to get an education. She didn't specify what, but it was get an education. Educate yourself. Be a thinking person. Have some dignity type of thing. And so, sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent there, Theo.
No, that's good stuff.
I'm very passionate about. Like, I think we do our kids a disservice by not talking to them about the cost of things.
No, and that's why I definitely wanted to, start this in the first place, because, I was thinking just, the more that I learn, the more angry, uncomfortable, and passionate I get about things, is because, I was told the same things, when you graduate high school, you're just going to go to college, and, you just start checking off boxes. And then, after you are done checking off those boxes, it was like, once you're given the freedom to, okay, there's no more boxes to check, what do you do now? Well, now I start figuring out, okay, I have my own freedom to think for myself. Well, I start doing research on, how much debt I've accumulated, the other alternatives, that are out there, and the other routes that I could have taken, all the things that I got myself into that I didn't know about, all the things that I now have to do as an adult who's graduated that I didn't learn, all the things monetarily that would have helped me along the way, like knowing about taxes and investing and things of that nature that would have helped me along the way, but now I have to learn on the fly. And so, those are really the reasons, and I want to share that information because it should be standard practice. It should be talked about in homes. It should be more frequent conversation because, it shouldn't just be boxes that checked in after you graduate college. Okay, freestyle and figure it out. It should be, okay, you're prepared for this. You know where to go next, and people have a bigger plan for themselves after graduating college, or after not graduating college, but they're able to make more informed decisions for themselves, that instead of having to figure it out on the fly and trial by fire.
Mm-hmm.
So
I cannot agree more. Absolutely. We just got to do better. We have to do better in educating young people about economics, money, how it really works.
Mm-hmm. And so we kind of, step one, obviously, in trying to solve a problem is identifying the root causes. So now kind of switching gears in part two, how the kind of the obstacles that we've mentioned, how are you, or how would you like to solve some of those things that we mentioned, if you had kind of like a magic wand, so to speak, to solve some of those problems that we see in the Black community as in terms of education?
Right. That's a great question. I think specifically in the Black community, when we start talking about education, I think, we had hit on earlier the family, and I think the children tend to do better when they have a supporting, not just in school but in life, when they have a supporting and loving family. Whether it's a mom and a dad, two moms, two dads, grandparents, whatever it is, but they have that consistent support system. And I think we have to take that into consideration. What is the family like? And also poverty is something that has to be taken into consideration.
Yep.
If you were living in poverty, we're talking about, lights on, food on the table, a roof over your head. If you are spending most of your time figuring out how you're going to survive, it is hard to sit down and think about how I'm going to study and do well in school when your basic needs are not being met. And I think in this country where there's so much wealth, we've got to do better in helping out those folks who are in poverty. And Dr. Martin Luther King spent a lot of his time on really going after the poverty issue in this country. There's no reason why anybody should be living in poverty here, but we do have that. And so why is that? So I think when you start talking about education, you have to look like, what does the family unit look like? Is it a loving and supportive home? Does poverty play a role in this? Are parents working so hard and such long hours to get food on the table that they can't be there to provide that consistent loving support to their children? Not everyone, if you've got a two-parent household, has the privilege for one parent to stay home.
Right.
Not everybody has that. That's a blessing to have that. So for those folks who don't have that, how do you create that? What needs to happen in the system? Why do parents, single moms or single dads, they take on so much? How do we help support them and fulfilling their primary role as parent to their children or child? So I think that's part of it. And what was the other point you said there, Theo? I lost track for a little bit. Thinking about the poverty piece.
No, I was just saying, if what gaps would you feel? How would you solve those gaps?
Yeah.
So I think
look at family structures overall and poverty. What do we do in this country? For example, when a woman has a child or a family adopts a baby, you get some places only 6 weeks of leave, and then your child has to go to a daycare with a stranger if you don't have family to help you. What kind of system is that?
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, this is where no wonder why some families have problems and some kids have issues. You've made life so difficult for parents to be able to take care of what's most important and precious to them, to pursue this quote-unquote American dream, which is killing people. So I think that we've got to have some tough conversations as a nation about what are we really doing to support people. There's the college issue. As we hit on, I think it's ridiculous that young people have to graduate with so much debt and they don't get the same ROI, return on investment. They just don't. They're not getting it. So what do we need to do that's different here? I think education enlightens the mind. It widens thought. It creates critical thinking and higher order thinking. And it's a beautiful thing to have. It's a gift, but not at the price of being miserable and being in debt for most of your adulthood. It's not worth it.
Right.
So I think we should have a conversation about what would a free college education look like for people, at least for public schools. If you decide to go to a private institution, okay, I could see an argument there for charging tuition. But if you're going to go to a public state-run institution, can we work with young people not to have so much debt? Can we?
Yep.
If it's not free, can we at least say, just a flat, low rate, $5,000 a year that you have to pay instead of some of these outrageous numbers that keep going up for public institutions? I fail to see how in the long run having more Americans in debt helps the economy. I just don't see how it helps the economy. I don't see how it helps families. And I speak from personal experience in my own life. I don't see how it helps. So I think we need to have discussions about poverty, about the prison pipeline that some argue starts in schools. Some people say it will start there.
Yeah.
I think it's time that and there's so many people are focusing and putting so much time and energy on these issues for Black folks. And I think it's time that more and more Black folks, all of us, once we get to a certain, I'm not going to say a certain age, because it really can be at any age, but we ask ourselves, well, what can I do?
Absolutely.
Where do I take personal responsibility other than recognizing there's a problem? Recognizing the problem, yes, that's the first step. Totally agree with that. But then it's what can I do? What can you do? What can my sister do?
Yep.
What can my friend do? What can we do? Is that sponsoring a child in a college prep program? Well, is it going to get them more debt? Is that the right answer? Is it doing more volunteer work? Is it in different places? Is it voting? It's all of these things that I think make an impact to influence change. So, at the end of the day, I'm going to go back to as much as possible, not as much as possible. Parents are your child's first teachers.
Family.
Period.
Yeah, family.
It's family. It's family first, before a career, before a job, before a car. It's family first. And so how in our own families do we support one another? How do we call out generational crap that's been going on for years? And every family has it. Every Black family has it. And how do we call those things out and be strong and move forward? You have to look at those things, starting first with your own tribe. And when I say tribe, I mean your family. And then with Black people, thinking about extending out to the greater community. I think a lot of Black public figures have really stepped up, and they've done things. Black people in public who are public figures have always, I think, in general, done what they can for the community, and that is from Muhammad Ali to now with Colin Kaepernick. But I think that, and we need that, but we also, for your average everyday person who's not going to be famous, what can we do?
Yep.
And I think it comes down to that too. What do we do to help this situation? And I think it's a collective, Theo. I don't think it is one person deciding they're going to be different, but it's also doing the work that you're doing, which I applaud you for trying to focus on certain aspects of just American life and say, okay, Black people have been in this country since the 1600s. All right, and you know what? It hasn't been a joyful ride for the majority of that time. Okay, we know that reality, we know that history.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we do to deal with those realities and move forward, but at the same time remembering the very recent history? Like, Theo, if I can say to you that my grandparents, that their grandparents were enslaved people,
Mm-hmm.
and were adults when they were freed in 1865, that was not long ago.
Right.
That was not a long time ago. And so on one end, you celebrate the progress, but on another end, you think, oh my God, we just kind of got out of this stuff.
Yep.
So it's still fresh, it's still raw, and it has to be handled with care. And it's so complicated and difficult because there are so many webs and tangles. But I think if we can kind of try to see through it, and again, going back to what can you do as an individual, and what can I do as an individual, and what can we do as a collective, I think we're doing that. I think we'll be okay. We'll be okay. But let's not forget that this is still pretty fresh and raw because it's recent. And sometimes I think we can forget that. People say, oh, slavery was in the past, Jim Crow was in the past. Not if I can say my grandparents, if I can say their grandparents were enslaved people, that wasn't a long time ago.
No, and it's a good point. When I look at all the webs and all the entanglements, and you say how education and the prison system somehow gets entangled, for me, when I look at it as well, it all leads back to the family for me as well. And the problem is so often we see that some people don't even understand that they're dealing with trauma. So there's some healing that has to be going on. There's some identification of the actual problem. But when you go back to slavery, racism, and Willie Lynch and Jim Crow and things, it was truly, they started with the attack to break black people down on the attack on the family, removing the black man from the family, humiliating the black man and from the family, doing things to the black women to prostitutize the black woman and put her out there as an object rather than, promote her as a queen and the partner to the black man and things of that nature. And we see all of that cyclical things being brought up again in society today, and people don't even know that they're facing the ramifications of those things again today. So it's identifying those things and being able to heal from those things, and then finding ways to combat that now. And so I really think that it all starts with healing the family, and once you can heal the family and unite the family, then we put ourselves as black people in a better position to combat the problems that we face today.
Yeah, and you said a word that really resonated with me, Theo, as you were talking, was healing.
Yeah.
And I think I think for us to recognize it's still raw, it's still fresh. We've started at a disadvantage behind the starting line. And there's been a lot of hurt, a lot of pain. A lot of black families have stories within their families of a loved one being lynched or murdered because of racism, or being denied access to college or starting a business. And that's why so many black folks left the South to go out up north or out west. All of these things are traumatic. So the healing is needed. Mm-hmm. The healing, and that takes some time. And healing takes time. And so I think having these conversations and bringing awareness, it's not woe is me, feel sorry for me. No, it's not. It's about reality. And that people have faced, I grew up with both of my parents and my sister, and, I had a great childhood growing up in California, and moved to Chicago, and if I can say myself as a black woman who is college educated and a professional, hey, I've been pulled over by the cops about 6 times. So people are, and it was always, and it was never because, I mean, I can think of twice where I was speeding. Okay, I own that. I can own that. But that type of humiliation, to be pulled over and questioned or accused of things, people aren't making this stuff up.
No, absolutely.
And so to deal with that every day, on top of just trying to live your life, you know, with your family and friends and work, it could be traumatic. So again, healing. There's a lot of healing that needs to be done.
Absolutely. And so, thank you again. This has been a wonderful discussion. I was glad I learned so much more about you, Miss Pickett, that I feel I didn't know before. But I appreciate you taking the time to discuss with me and contribute all of your knowledge to the channel. It was wonderful speaking with you. Did you want to share any last words or any last tidbits?
No, the only thing I would like to say, Theo, is thank you for this opportunity. I think it's young people like you and your generation who are going to really make the difference within the Black community and also outside of the Black community, because we need more young Black voices to speak their truth and what they've experienced. And I just commend you and applaud you, because you don't have to be doing this. You could be doing something totally different right now. And so I applaud you and I thank you, and I think, you know, I would imagine that your family and your ancestors are proud of you and what you've been able to accomplish. You've always been a great young man, Theo. It's just great to see you continuing on in that path.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You don't know how much that means, honestly.
No, I mean it. If you remember, I'm not about false encouragement.
No,
so.
I know.
I mean, man. You're doing wonderful work. So keep it up.
Oh gosh, I don't know how to accept compliments. I'm weird. But thank you. No, for real, that means the world to me. Just want to shout out to our audience. If you've been with us for this amount of time, thank you. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Let us know what you think of the video and what was shared. And peace out. Thank you.